Christ is risen. Today is April 28th, 2020, and this happens to be the Tuesday after St. Thomas Sunday. If in the past you've ever paid close attention to the calendar, the church calendar, you'll always notice that this Tuesday, the Tuesday after Thomas Sunday, is called the Day of Rejoicing. In many parishes, it's on Thomas Sunday that there's the tradition to go and bless the graves of the departed faithful of the church. But particularly that would happen on Tuesday, the Day of Rejoicing. But because of practical reasons, it became easier to do that on Sunday. And so for many parishes, Thomas Sunday is a very common time to go to cemeteries and bless graves. So I thought that today we would take a moment just to talk about this day of rejoicing, because again, for many people, they might not realize that it's even there. In parochial life, not much happens with it because of when it falls. So I wanted to take this moment just to maybe give a little explanation about that during this time. So I'll start by reading from the Synaxarion about the day itself. It says, "On this day, the Tuesday of St. Thomas week, according to the order instituted by our holy fathers, we call to remembrance in paschal joy all those who have died from the beginning of the ages in faith and in hope of resurrection and life eternal. Having previously celebrated the radiant feast of Christ's glorious resurrection, the faithful commemorate the dead today with the pious intent to share the great joy of this paschal feast with those who have departed this life in the hope of their own resurrection. This is the same blessed joy with which the dead heard our Lord announce his victory over death when he descended into Hades, thus leading forth by the hand the righteous souls of the old covenant into paradise. This is the same unhoped-for joy the holy myrrh-bearing women experienced when discovering the empty tomb and the undisturbed grave clothes. In addition, this is the same bright joy the holy apostles encountered in the upper room where Christ appeared though the doors were closed. In short, this feast is a continuation of the gladdening feast of Pascha, enabling us in kindred joy to celebrate the luminous resurrection with our Orthodox forefathers who have fallen asleep. There is evidence of the commemoration of the dead today in the writings of the Church Fathers. St. John Chrysostom mentions the commemoration of the dead performed on Tuesday of St. Thomas week in his homily on the cemetery and the cross. And by chance, his Beatitude Metropolitan Tikhon today on the Orthodox Church in America Facebook page actually put a piece of this sermon that's mentioned by St. John Chrysostom. Before I read that little selection from that homily, I also want to read to you a little note from our rubrics, which is very interesting because none of the texts of the church on this day, whether it's Matins, Liturgy, or Vespers, actually point to the departed themselves. And our note in our rubrics book, it says that after the liturgy on this day, on Tuesday, it is customary for the faithful to visit graves and have memorials served for their relatives and to give to the needy. So this was also a day, very interesting in the pious tradition of the church, where it was a day of almsgiving, a day of thinking of those in need. So that might be something good for us all to think about on this particular day. On this day of rejoicing, it says there are no special prayers for the dead, the remembrance being observed only according to pious custom. It's interesting to read that note because the pious custom would already have been in place by the time of St. John Chrysostom, who preaches about this happening. So this would have been already in the late 4th and early 5th century where this was happening. So it's a pious tradition that's lasted for a very long time. So here's a short snippet from that sermon by St. John Chrysostom that his Beatitude shared today. So it says, "For what cause did our fathers, leaving their houses of prayer in the city, establish the practice of assembling outside the city on this day and in this very place? Inasmuch as here rests a multitude of the departed, today Jesus Christ went down to the dead, thus we also gather here. Why this very place is called a place of sleep. That's what the word cemetery means, a place of sleep, that you might know that they who have died and lie here have not died, but rest and sleep. I will tell you something even more remarkable. Learn now how Christ triumphed over the devil, and you will be even more amazed, for using the very weapons that the devil used to conquer us, Christ vanquished him. Once he seized his weapons, he triumphed over him, and listen now to how he did it. A virgin, wood, and death were the symbols of our defeat. The virgin was Eve, for she knew not man. The wood was the tree in paradise, and death was Adam's penance. But behold, a virgin, wood, and death, the symbols of our defeat, now become the symbols of our victory. Tell of the mighty acts of the Lord. Out of death to which we were subject, we became immortal. These are the accomplishments of the cross. And so the virgin who was Eve becomes Mary, the mother of God. The wood becomes the wood of the cross itself. And death itself becomes life for us. So it's a beautiful day today to think about how we're remembering all those who have gone before us in the hope of the resurrection. It's also interesting that the gospel appointed for today, for that Tuesday after St. Thomas Sunday, is John 3:16. So it simply begins, we all know it, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. And what a wonderful reminder of those who have gone before us. And what a beautiful thing it is to remember that word for cemetery. It's a place of sleep. So this was, again, a proclamation that Christians were making from very early on in the church to go to the places where the departed were sleeping and awaiting that second coming of Christ. So again, just a few little words to think about on this day. It's a good thing that we remember all of our departed, and it's also a good thing that we're reminded that this was early on in the church, a day of almsgiving. So maybe as a family today, it's a good thing to think about, how can I be helpful to those around me? Christ is risen.